I am proud and happy to welcome you all to this channel. This is our daily show. My name is Duncan, and today I want us to pick up the conversation from where we left. In the past 1 week, the government has been trying as much as possible. Okay, I don't know, but I believe they are to manage this thing called inflation, to try and manage this thing called currency depreciation, and to just manage the economy in general. From a layman's understanding, we normally just say the prices of commodities have gone up. We don't know the reasons, and most of the time we will make our conclusions based on hearsay. When we move around, we just say this government is not working. We wish we had a different government. Kenya has become unbearable. So we make those kind of statements. But behind those kind of statements, there is a lot of information that leads an economy to become unstable, that leads an economy to constantly have the prices of commodities going up. And it is those specific things that I want us to break down today. But even before we go there, I painted a picture of how we need to understand sometimes within our borders, a lot of the things that are happening are not unique to us. And it is important sometimes for us, for you, to look around your neighbors and see what is happening. Then try to copy the best things and, of course, to avoid the bad things that they are doing. And we made a step to look around our countries, our neighbors. And one of the countries that came seriously to my attention was Ghana. Okay, they are not very close to Kenya, yes, but clearly whatever is happening in Ghana is a perfect example of what we need to learn and not do. And I'm sorry to say this, but most African countries are somewhere in between where Ghana is and where they should be. Yeah. Ghana has an inflation rate that has hit almost 42%. And that is even a reduction compared to what was there like a few months ago. I think they hit the highest level of inflation ever since independence at around 58% a few months ago. And that is not a good place to be as a country. And when I saw that, and I even saw that their currency was depreciating almost at the same rate, then I knew there is trouble in that paradise. I call it paradise because I believe Africa is home. Africa is paradise. There is so much here. And we just need to make our home better. So we are going to look at that. And we are also going to look at, in Kenya, whenever we mention something like inflation, when we say that there has been inflation, what are the things that are looked at? What commodities does the government look at to determine that? And how do they determine that actually the current level of inflation is affecting the lives of people and it is having an adverse effect on the general status of the economy? So to start us off, let me just define for some of our audience what inflation is. Whenever there is a general increase in prices of basic commodities that are consumed by the majority of the population, that increase is called inflation. And it is not entirely a bad thing. It only becomes a bad thing when it is unpredictable and it cannot be planned for. Inflation is inevitable. At one point, prices will go up at one point. But it is the rate of change. How frequent does it change? And how drastic does it change? That is the biggest conversation. So, whenever there is expected inflation, every person, every player in the economy will plan ahead. People will prepare for that. But it is unfortunate that some countries do not have the relevant insight to know how to plan for inflation because their economies are a bit exposed. So inflation is the consistent and continuous rise in prices of basic commodities. Today you are buying bread at 100 shillings. Tomorrow you're buying it at 150. The day after you're buying it at 170. Now, the challenge it poses is that You as the person buying, you cannot know how many times or how far into the future will you be able to continue eating bread. You have to start rethinking, what else can I introduce into my meal? The producer on the other side, the people who produce bread, they will not even know how to plan ahead. Will people continue demanding or buying bread because of this continuous change in prices? How then do they plan around their workforce? How do they plan around their costs? There are some silent costs that come as a result of inflation. Yeah. So whenever you hear that there's an inflation in a country, then you understand it is the continual and consistent and drastic and just change in general prices of commodities. And like I've said, it is not entirely a bad thing, especially when it is at low levels. Yeah, there is an element of inflation that actually spurs economic growth. Yeah, and acceptable levels of inflation are between 1 and 2%. Yeah, unacceptable levels of inflation go even to the levels of 1,000%. You've heard of hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is the flyaway rate of inflation. 1,000% rate of inflation means that if something was cost you like 100, within a short while it will cost you 100,000. That is very dangerous, and it happens. Do not be shocked. That is a reality that there are countries that have actually experienced that, and you don't want your country to be one of those. So let's come back a bit home. Inflation is a sign of stability of an economy. How you are able to maintain prices over a longer period of time is an indicator of how stable your economy is. That's why when you look at a country like China's inflation is currently at 2%. That is a standard level of acceptable inflation. And it has been there for a while now. Japan at 2.5, acceptable levels of inflation. When you come back even closer home, Tanzania right next to us here has been maintaining its inflation at a rate of less than 3%. And they have done that in a while. And I will delve deep into this country called Tanzania. I've always had an interest in it because I want to understand basically what are we not seeing or what are we seeing but we are assuming. Because they have managed to maintain some level of stability, which is not usual for most of these African countries that we know. So when I pick another big giant economically like the US for a long time has managed to maintain its inflationary rates at around less than 3%, and UK and France. But of late, actually right now, even the rate of inflation in the US is higher than even in Kenya. The US has an inflationary rate of around 8%. UK has at around 7.9, which is almost the same as Kenya. And France has it at around 5.2. So guys, you can see this change in prices is not only something, it's not a local issue only. You need to understand that. Sometimes we make too much noise to our presidents, but sometimes you can clearly see it is not uniquely a local problem. Yeah? Because if a country like the US, which has been pretty much stable for a very long while, now has an inflationary rate of around 8%, the question is, what is that? What is causing that? And once we understand what is causing that, then it could be, then it is now trickling down to economies like Kenya. And as you know, the UK and the US are very big economic partners to Kenya. So of course, if they are having issues with their inflation, you will expect definitely that Kenya will not be protected. It will also face the same. Now, let's go and look at this Ghana country first. Then we will come back and look at our country even deeper. Inflationary rates at Ghana is around 42%. And the reason why that crisis is happening in Ghana right now is because of two reasons. Fiscal policies and monetary policies. Monetary policies and fiscal policies. For those people who don't understand, whenever there is an issue in an economy, there are only two ways in which you can manage the situation. Economies that fall into a crisis are managed in two ways: through a fiscal approach, through a monetary approach. Fiscal approach, when you hear fiscal policies, and I know when you watch news, you hear these statements being made, but sometimes you don't really know what they mean. Fiscal policies are those tools or approaches which the government can use to manage the economy. And when you speak about the government, there are only two aspects: revenue and expenditure. How the government makes money and how the government spends money. Where and how it spends, and where and how it makes money. That is fiscal policies. So whenever the government itself wants to make adjustments to an economy, they can only make adjustments on the income side and on the expenditure side. On the income side, they will either touch taxes, or they will touch borrowing, which is debt. That is what you hear. That is what is called public debt. On the expenditure side, they will touch the recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure is the usual expenses in the ministries, or they will touch the development expenditure. Yeah? Development expenditure is money spent on things that are supposed to improve the quality of lives and to take Kenya to the next level in terms of development. And then they can as well touch, what do we call that? The development side, or they can as well touch the debt repayment side in the expenditure. Understand? So those are the confines within which a government can adjust or manage the economy through the fiscal approach. When you come to the monetary approach, monetary policies are on the CBK side. Central bank is where the monetary policies are executed and formulated. And monetary policy majorly is how the Central Bank of Kenya, or for any other country for that matter, manages money supply. The quantity of money in an economy determines a lot on how that economy can grow and not grow. Yeah. So the CBK will limit how much they release into the economy, how much money they allow to circulate into the economy, so that it can spur exactly the kind of economic growth that the government through the ministry or through the treasury has planned to achieve its objectives. I hope I've not confused you guys. Yeah. So when you hear that a country has issues with its fiscal policies, then it means there are issues either in how much the government is collecting, or the way in which they are collecting. There is an issue in the way in which they are spending, and I think in the way in which we are spending, Kenya is a casualty on that, and even in the way in which we make money as a government. I don't think I can fault so much the CBK or the monetary policy of Kenya, because monetary policy, as long as it is consistent with the objective of most of the time of the government, most of the time there is really little or not so much that they can do. So when you look at the fiscal side of things, that is where a lot of the time there is not so much control, and there is mismanagement, and there is misuse by the government, and it affects the economy significantly. Now, I hope we understand that. So what I have learned for the case of Ghana, there was not so good or well controlled or well managed fiscal approach to the economy for a long while. I am making an assumption here, but we shall get even deeper with time. So I am making an assumption that either the government of Ghana was not generating sufficient income through taxes. They were not generating sufficient income. They were running a deficit budget, but then they continuously went to borrow. Yeah, so they have relied on borrowing for a very long time to complement or to sustain their government needs, and it reached a point where now they were too indebted. And you remember debt, a lot of the debt comes into foreign denominated currency, and in this case we are talking about the dollar. And it is because of that level of imbalance, and you come and face inflation at such a time, then the situation now degenerates and becomes even worse. Because you can imagine this. Prices of commodities start rising. And when prices of commodities start rising, what happens? Investors or people who are looking at that economy, they start losing their confidence. And when they start losing their confidence in your economy, money starts moving out. They start removing the money out of the economy. When people remove money out of the economy, remember this is foreign investment. So once they start moving money out of the economy, what happens? There is a general increase in demand of dollars for you to be able to offset the demand. Yeah. Now that general increase in the demand of dollars can only be met only if you have sufficient reserves within your country. If you don't have reserves, you have to look for dollar reserves. Where do you get dollar reserves? The only way countries have dollar reserves is when they have a good balance of payments. That means you are exporting a lot more than you're importing. It is always good to have a lot of more exports, because when you export a lot, people pay you in dollars. And when they pay you in dollars, you're increasing your dollar-denominated reserves. And it puts you in a better position as a country or as an economy when you're exposed to the international economy. So when that happens and you don't have, and people are losing confidence in your economy, so it means even the exports that you were to do, you cannot do, because no money will come in. So where do you get those dollars? You, as a government, are forced to go and seek help from international organizations now, like the IMF, for support or for help. And when they give you that money, and again for example, you don't use that money well to come back and stabilize the economy, the cycle will continue for a very long while. And the prices will continue rising because no one wants to hold on to the cash, to the money that they have. They don't want to put it in the bank because it is losing value. They don't want to stay with it long because it is losing value. Everyone continuously wants to spend. So every money that comes into your hands, you want to spend. And when you want to spend, you create demand. Whenever everyone wants to spend, it reminds me of a story. Do you remember when we used to go back then when we were in school? We will go for sports days, and there are these people who will come with, let's say, for example, samosas. Now, he has come with 200 samosas to sell, and when he left home, he knew very well that he is going to sell those samosas at 20 shillings per samosa. And then he arrives and he realizes that the demand in the sports day arena is just too much more than what he anticipated. Then suddenly he decides, no, I'll change the prices. I'll start selling it at 40. Now, whether you like it or not, if you decide not to buy it, trust me, there are people who will be very much willing and ready to buy at that 40 Kenya shillings or 40 shillings for that matter. Yeah? And even if he was to change it to 80, as long as, for example, the people who are supplying those samosas in the event are few, the prices can keep going until they get to a point where it will just keep rising until he finishes his samosas. And that is a perfect example of what I'm trying to tell you. When there is so much demand in currency than the economy can sustain or can give back, then the prices of commodities will continuously rise and rise and rise and rise and rise. And the only way to manage that is to increase supply. But supply cannot increase because now the cost of production, number one, has gone up. Investors are leaving. They are leaving the economy or they are removing their money from the economy because now they don't have confidence in that economy. So it means there will be a shortage in supply. No one wants to put their money into the production because now that decrease in value of the local economy and the currency is causing people to be afraid of investing. So supply might not necessarily increase and prices will keep going and going and soaring and soaring. Understand? So that is a perfect situation in which a country like Ghana found themselves. I will do a special feature only to explain Ghana as a country, but for now, let's just get it at that high level. Now, why am I scared? Why am I scared? Because when I look at Ghana, I don't think it's a unique case in Africa. So many countries are almost in that balance. I'll take an example. If you come back home, the conversation is the same. Everyone is talking about debt. Because we are borrowing, always borrowing to offset our budget deficits. Yeah? But our budget deficits are coming as a result of, number one, we are not sufficiently getting the best out of our economy. The little that the government is able to collect, they are misusing. And once you misuse money that you have collected from the people, you will still need money to execute government services and operations. And it only makes halfway through the year, that's when leaders realize that we don't have money, that the economy cannot give you the money that you're looking for through taxes. So they always just choose to go and borrow and borrow. And you realize that the amount of money that the government pays in debt repayment is almost the same as the amount of money that the government borrows. So this cycle of debt never comes to an end. And when your country now is hit with a situation of inflation, like now, for example, Ghana, and you still need to repay the debts which you borrowed in foreign denominated currencies, and in this case, the dollar, then it becomes a problem. You start looking for dollars right, left, and center. And if your dollar reserves are not sufficient, what do? You will definitely default on your loans. And when you default on your loans, as in the case of IMF and all these multilateral sources of debt to our countries, then you are aggravating even the situation further. And countries can go down to levels where they can experience hyperinflation. And hyperinflation can bring a country to its knees. And that is why it is important. I personally think one of the approaches in which Kenya has taken as a country, remove the politics, forget about the politics, and just look at some of the steps that the Kenyan president has decided to take. So many people do not agree with me, but I personally think one of the ways in which you can protect yourself from these issues is to try as much as possible to produce enough or to generate enough within the economy itself before you think about going to borrow. The Kenyan president has decided to improve or to come up with their tougher fiscal policies. They are tougher, a bit tougher on the Kenyan people, but they are not things that you will see the rewards in the short run. Something like, for example, today I'm putting on red. This is the KRA number, color, so I think I can now speak on matters tax. The Kenya Revenue Authority of Kenya has been generating, I think, around less than 2 trillion in income, in taxes. And when you're generating less than 2 trillion in taxes for an economy that is almost hitting 14 trillion in GDP, then it means the KRA is not meeting its objectives. If I were the president, I will go and tell KRA, you're not meeting your objectives, because I will be expecting them to give me something like between 3 trillion to around 3.5 trillion, or even better, 4 trillion. I'm just using a flat figure of around 30% in taxes. The corporate tax in Kenya is around 30%. So if I were to just use that as an example, perfect, 14%, 30% of 14%, the government should be at least be able to generate around 3 trillion from the people. Now, maybe the government is actually meeting those targets, but corruption is not enabling that money to get to the government. It could be true, and that is another conversation. But if corruption is not the reason why KRA is not meeting its targets, then I would definitely say that pushing the tax element for us to be able to achieve our revenue targets is one of the best or one of the most important policies that a government can take for now. The other one is to increase or fast track the process of meeting the obligations for debt repayment.